My name is Aurelia Hart, 28 years old. The first lie began at the funeral, not because anyone meant to lie, but because grief is the easiest mask to wear. Rain beaded on the black umbrellas like sequins, while the priest's voice thinned into the wind, and my Aunt Bernice pressed a wadded tissue to her eye with Broadway precision. The moment the last clump of dirt fell onto my grandfather's coffin, she peeled away from the huddle of cousins and cornered me in the cemetery lot between two idling SUVs, mascara carved into perfect, deliberate tears. It's just tragic how he left everything to that children's hospital, she choked, a tremor in her throat that I had seen her practice in mirrors before charity galas. 73 million to strangers while his own blood gets nothing. Behind her, Uncle Clifford nodded solemnly, though 15 minutes earlier I'd heard him on the phone in the men's room complaining about having to buy his own lunch after the service. A seagull cried. Somewhere a car door slammed. The whole scene felt staged, like we were all extras in a play about loss that someone had rewritten into a farce. The will reading had been the kind you don't forget. Grandpa's entire fortune, donated to charity, the mansion, listed for sale, even his cars, gifted away. What remained for family were sentimental items. I got his walking cane. Bernice actually laughed when the lawyer handed it to me. A hand-carved wooden stick with a silver raven's head for a handle, the beak clever and sharp. At least someone got something useful, she sneered, as if the word useful were an insult. I took the cane home to my studio apartment where the single window overlooks a brick wall that leaks rust when it rains. I set the cane across my knees like an argument and, for the first time, looked. The wood was darker than I remembered, the kind of dark that breathes under your fingers, worn smooth where his palm had rested for decades. When I traced the shaft with my thumb, I caught on tiny ridges that didn't feel like age. They felt intentional. I dragged my desk lamp closer and angled the light low. Letters glimmered up from the grain, so faint they nearly weren't there, spiraling down the cane in a tight helix. My breath stumbled. Grandpa and I used to spend summers solving puzzles in his library with the curtains drawn against August heat. Chess problems, substitution ciphers, riddles collected from everywhere his business had sent him. He'd move a night and murmur, "The mind is a muscle, Relay. Most people let it go soft. Yours was born hungry. Promise me you'll feed it." I had promised with the easy certainty of a child who thinks promises are just sweeter versions of yes. On the cane, the carving read like a poem if you let your eyes relax, where ravens rest and memories keep. Past the garden's thorny sweep. 7 stones mark sacred ground. What was lost shall now be found. Below the rhyme, a string of numbers with a decimal, then another run of numbers, the long latitude rhythm of coordinates. My fingers shook as I typed them into a map. The pin landed on Spokane, Washington, exactly where my grandfather's estate stood, or had stood, the mansion I'd loved like another grandparent. "Scheduled for demolition next week," the lawyer had said, with a sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. Why hide a path to his own property unless the will was misdirection? The thought slid into place with a click I felt in my teeth. My phone buzzed face down on the desk. I flipped it over. "Stop looking. Some secrets should stay buried. This is your only warning." No number, just the sentence like a black bag over my head. I stared at it long enough to feel my heartbeat climb behind my eyes. Someone else knew about the cane. Someone watching me from a distance that suddenly felt too near. I circled my small apartment, sink to bed to door to sink, then grabbed my keys. If this was a game, I understood the clock. I could stay and pretend safety was a place you could sit still, or I could move before whoever sent that message knocked. The drive to Spokane ate 14 hours. I don't remember except in flashes. Gas station coffee that tasted like scorched paper, a washed-out billboard for a fireworks store, the quick white blink of deer in a ditch. I thought about the summers at the estate, the aviary behind the rose garden where ravens blinked like jury members, my grandfather's hands, always warm, the way he'd taught me to listen for what a puzzle refuses to say. Ravens remember faces, he'd told me once, tipping seed into a black beak. They hold grudges, they reward kindness, and most important, they always return home. By the time I turned onto the long driveway, the sun had fallen behind a bank of clouds, and evening peeled open carefully, as if afraid to tear. The mansion loomed ahead, windows boarded, hedges overgrown, the fountain a dry bowl filled with leaves. The place looked like it had exhaled and never inhaled again. A chain-link fence ringed the perimeter, but a section sagged near the service path. The metal twisted as if it were merely tired, not locked. I slipped through and moved past the front steps where I used to race Grandpa to the door, his cane clicking on stone in a rhythm that felt like applause. The air smelled of wet rose and damp earth. Night insects tuned their instruments in the grass. I kept my phone in my pocket and my free hand on the cane, the way a diver keeps a palm on the rope in a black sea. Ravens rest and memories keep past the garden's thorny sweep. The path to the aviary was still there if you knew where to look. Beneath the arch of brambled roses gone feral, along the low hedge where spiders stretched bridges of silk. The aviary stood like a cathedral of wire and steel at the property's edge. Even empty, it carried the suggestion of movement, as if the air remembered wing beats. I clicked on a small flashlight and traced the beam across the ground. 7 stones mark sacred ground. They were impossible to miss once you expected them. 7 granite markers, each about 2 feet tall, forming a circle beneath the old oak where Grandpa used to sit with a book while the ravens preened. The stones were arranged with the kind of precision that pretends to be random at first glance. I crouched, pressing my fingers to the dirt in the center, and felt the give of soil that had been tamped and healed. Something waited below. I hadn't brought a shovel. I found one, as if scripted, leaning against the aviary wall, orange handle bright as a sign. The first slice into the ground drew up the smell of wet clay and old metal. I dug in a steady rhythm until my blade struck something that thunked heavy and certain. 3 feet down, steel flashed at me like a grin. A box, rectangular, an electronic lock with a small screen blinking a patient cursor. My throat was suddenly dry enough to hurt. "I wouldn't do that," a man's voice said, not unkind. I spun, shovel raised. A man in his 50s stepped from the shadow of the aviary, mud on his polished shoes, coat too good for this place. His face was familiar the way faces at funerals are, seen at a distance, filed under later. "Who are you?" I asked. He lifted his hands, palms empty. "Someone who's been protecting your grandfather's secrets for 30 years. He glanced past me at the box as if it were a sleeping animal. "My name is Garrison Thorne. I was his business partner. And if you open that box now, you'll destroy everything he died to protect." The name hit a switch in my head. Thorne. He had been at the funeral. 3rd pew from the back, eyes lowered, not performing grief. Protect from who? My family? His laugh was small and bitter. "Especially your family." He stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "Do you really think he left $73 million to a fake charity by accident? He built that paper trail for a reason. Your Uncle Clifford has been laundering money through legitimate businesses for 15 years. Drug money, weapons money, worse. Your Aunt Bernice isn't just complicit, she runs the logistics. The accountant who found it? They killed him and called it a heart attack." My hands felt far away. "Marcus Whitley," I whispered. The name of a ghost the city had agreed to forget. "Natural causes. Induced." Garrison's mouth tightened. "Synthetic compound. Untraceable in most labs. Your grandfather discovered it by hiring a forensic accountant of his own. Then he came to me. Then we built this." He nodded at the steel. "Evidence he couldn't trust anyone else to guard." "Then why the will?" I asked. "Why the hospital? Why make everyone hate him?" "Because the police are compromised," Garrison said simply. "Judges, too. He needed to trigger a federal review without tipping your aunt and uncle. The donation does that. The demolition schedule does that. And you—" His eyes flicked to the cane. "You were always the endgame, the one he trained." I wanted to sit down. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at the blinking cursor and said, "What's the code?" "That," he sighed, "is the problem. There are 3 of them, and they can only be entered in sequence at 3 different locations. This is the first. The second's at the university study. The third's at your grandmother's grave. He designed it to keep you alive and buy us time." "Us?" I asked. Before he could answer, engines rolled in the distance like thunder, deciding to localize. Headlights stitched the hedges with white. Garrison's face changed, decades of caution slamming back into place. "They're here." Floodlights bloomed, swallowing the garden whole. Dark SUVs broke across the lawn, doors yanked open before the vehicles fully stopped. "Fan out," Bernice's voice called, crisp as a knife. "She's here." Clifford emerged behind her with 4 men who moved like they'd trained for a different kind of war. The rifles were wrong on this lawn and somehow exactly right. Bernice stepped into the circle's light, grief costume discarded. "Hello, sweetheart," she purred. "I think you have something that belongs to the family." Garrison put himself half a step in front of me, which is how you tell the truth about a man without using words. "This is her grandfather's property," he said. "She has every right to be here." "Actually," Bernice said, smile neat as a stitch, "the property transfers to the hospital at midnight, so tonight we're just cleaning up loose ends." A nod, and one of the men cracked Garrison across the temple with the butt of a weapon. He dropped to his knees, then to his hands, then the ground. My vision tunneled. Clifford checked his watch. "Where's the box?" "What box?" I said, because sometimes you tell a lie to honor a better truth. He stepped into my space, breath sour with coffee. "Don't play games. We've been watching you since the funeral. Camera in your hallway. Tracker on your car. Your phone? A welcome mat." He tipped his head toward the oak. "Dig." The men moved to the center. Dirt flew. The hole I'd made was obvious, but empty enough to invite doubt. While their attention tilted, I followed the line of moonlight across the 7 stones and noticed something I might have missed, if fear were louder. The stones threw shadows toward the oak bark, where numbers had been carved, so shallow they only showed at a certain angle. 072848, July 28th, 1948, my grandfather's birthday. The first code hiding in the simplest place a family might look, a birthday cake memory carved into a tree. "There's nothing here," one of the men called. Bernice's smile thinned. "Where is it?" "This was just the first clue," I said, fighting to keep the tremor out of my voice. "The real cache is somewhere else. I need time to—" "You have until sunrise," Clifford said. "Find it, or we start removing fingers." Zip ties bit my wrists. Garrison's blood matted his hair. As they marched us toward the house, I looked back once at the circle of stones, at the oak, at the carved numbers only the moon could read. Grandpa had taught me that some answers live in light that requires patience. I tucked the code into my memory like a match I wasn't ready to strike. The mansion door yawned open on its hinges. The hall smelled like old polish and plans. Somewhere in the dark, a clock began to count the hour, slow and accusing, as if it wanted me to understand that time wasn't on my side anymore. It was part of the trap. The house had changed, and not at all. The marble foyer still gleamed faintly beneath the dust. The staircase still curved upward in that grand, unnecessary sweep my grandfather had called a lesson in hubris. But the air was colder now, filled with the smell of neglect and gun oil. Clifford's men shoved Garrison and me into the library and locked the heavy oak doors behind us. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed like punctuation. The room was a time capsule of my childhood summers. The floor-to-ceiling shelves, the same chessboard set up near the window, the leather chair with the dent from Grandpa's shoulder. Even the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingered, like memory refusing to vacate. But tonight, it all felt smaller, as if the room itself had been holding its breath since the last time he sat here. Garrison groaned softly, pressing a hand to his temple where blood glistened. I tore free of my zip ties, using the edge of the metal desk handle, and crouched beside him. "You need a doctor." "I need you to listen," he said, his voice low and rough. "They'll tear this place apart before sunrise. You have to find what your grandfather left behind." "They'll kill us first," I said. He gave a dry, humorless smile. "Then you'd better be faster than them." A key scraped in the lock, and Bernice stepped in, all control and ice. 2 men flanked her, rifles at their sides. She glanced around the library with a faint, nostalgic sigh. "I always did hate this room," she said. "Too many books, not enough liquidity." Clifford followed, checking his watch again. "Time's running short, really. Tell us where the evidence is, and maybe we can all walk out alive." I didn't answer. I was busy studying the chessboard. The pieces weren't random. I recognized the layout immediately. White king on E1, black queen on D8, knights and rooks forming angles. The sacrifice gambit, Grandpa's favorite puzzle. He used to say it was the most painful move in chess, giving up your strongest piece to save the game. Bernice's voice broke through my thoughts. "Where's the box?" "It's not here," I said, the lie almost effortless now. "It was just a clue. The real site is hidden in the coordinates on the cane. I need time to solve it." "Time you don't have." Clifford gestured sharply, and one of the men yanked Garrison to his feet. Start talking, or he bleeds out right here. Something hot flared in me, fear braided with anger. You'll never get what you want without me, I said. You're not half as smart as you think you are. Bernice's smile widened, slow and deliberate. You sound just like him, she said, always playing games. She stepped closer until I could see the fine lines at the corners of her mouth, the faint glitter of sweat on her upper lip. He thought he could outsmart us too. You killed him, I whispered. She didn't flinch. He was senile, darling. Started talking about going to the authorities, threatening to cut us off. We couldn't let him ruin everything. Her calmness was more terrifying than a scream. Clifford's phone buzzed. He checked it, muttered something to her about security sweeps, and the two of them left the room with the guards. As soon as the lock clicked, I exhaled the breath I'd been holding. They admitted it, I said. They actually— Don't waste time being shocked, Garrison interrupted. Use it. He nodded toward the chessboard. Whatever you're thinking, do it now. I stared at the pieces, replaying the memory of Grandpa teaching me the move. Sometimes, he'd said, moving the queen into danger, the only way to win is to let go of what everyone else thinks matters most. I mimicked the move, sliding the queen forward. Nothing happened. No mechanism clicked. No secret panel opened. But as I leaned closer, I saw that the portrait of Grandma hanging above the fireplace wasn't level. My pulse jumped. I crossed the room, adjusted the frame, and heard a soft mechanical hiss. The portrait swung forward, revealing a digital safe embedded in the wall. Found it, I breathed. Code, Garrison rasped. I typed the numbers I'd memorized from the oak tree. 072848, Grandpa's birthday. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope, the paper yellowed but neatly sealed. My name was written across it in his precise handwriting. For Aurelia. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. My dearest granddaughter, if you're reading this, then my fears have come true. Your aunt and uncle have shown their true selves, and you are in danger. The box you uncovered contains evidence of their crimes. Financial records, recordings, surveillance that will bring down their entire network, but it will also put your life at risk. I have arranged 3 coded sites. Each must be activated in sequence to release the evidence safely. The fake charity, the will, the cane, these were distractions to buy you time. The system will expose them to the FBI once the 3rd code is entered. If you are trapped, use the emergency protocol. Behind the 3rd bookshelf from the left, press the spine of Paradise Lost. It opens a tunnel. Follow it north for half a mile. It leads to the Riverside Cemetery, near your grandmother's resting place. In the unmarked mausoleum beside hers, you'll find what you need. Trust no one but Agent Patricia Vance of the FBI. Use the red phone there. She knows everything. You were always the sharpest mind in the family. Use it now to survive. Grandpa, I barely had time to fold the letter before footsteps echoed down the hallway again. Garrison struggled to his feet. Go, he whispered. Do what he said. What about you? I'll buy you a few seconds. I hesitated, then darted to the shelves, counting quickly. 1, 2, 3. The spine of Paradise Lost was worn and smooth beneath my fingers. I pressed it. A click, then a rumble. The entire shelf shifted backward, revealing a narrow stone tunnel lit by dim emergency lights. Cold air rolled out, carrying the scent of dust and oil. The door burst open behind me. Bernice's shout split the room. She's gone! I crawled into the tunnel and pulled the hidden latch to close it. The sound of pounding fists thudded on the other side, muffled by stone. I forced myself forward, crawling on hands and knees. The letter clutched against my chest. The tunnel was barely 4 feet high. Every few yards, a lantern cast pale light on the walls and on the photographs pinned there. I slowed, heart hammering. The pictures were surveillance shots. Bernice shaking hands with men in suits outside hotels. Clifford loading boxes into trucks. Newspaper clippings about unsolved disappearances. Grandpa had been documenting them for years. There were shelves stocked with water, medical kits, even a flashlight that still worked. He had planned for this. He had built an escape route under the very house where they'd plotted against him. By the time the tunnel widened enough for me to stand, my knees were raw and my pulse roared in my ears. I pressed on, following the incline upward until a faint blue light appeared ahead. A steel door waited at the tunnel's end. I shoved it open and stepped into damp grass and silence. Riverside Cemetery spread before me, a quilt of headstones under the paling edge of dawn. The world smelled of dew and iron. I found Grandma's mausoleum easily, white marble streaked with moss. The one beside it was smaller, unmarked, and locked with an electronic keypad. I typed the same code again, 072848. The lock beeped and released. Inside, the air was cool and dry, humming faintly. The walls weren't stone at all. They were steel panels, lined with monitors. Computer screens glowed to life, displaying surveillance feeds from around the estate and beyond. Warehouses, bank offices, unfamiliar city streets. File cabinets lined the back wall, and a red phone sat on a desk. I picked it up. It dialed automatically. "Agent Vance," a woman's voice answered. Calm, precise. "Is this Aurelia Hart?" My throat caught. "My grandfather told me to call you." "Thank God," she said. "We've been waiting for your signal. Are you safe?" "Not for long," I said. "They're looking for me." "We know. Stay inside the mausoleum. A tactical team is en route. Do not leave until I tell you." Through the monitor feeds, I saw black SUVs converging on the estate again, but these vehicles bore the FBI seal. "Agent Vance," I said, staring at the screens. "They're here." "Good," she replied. "Stay where you are. This is over now." But as I hung up, I wasn't sure what over meant. The monitors flickered, switching between angles. Bernice shouting orders. Clifford trying to run. Men scattering. Sirens rose in the distance, faint but coming closer. In the cold glow of the mausoleum, surrounded by the ghosts of the living and the dead, I realized what Grandpa had done. He hadn't just left me a puzzle. He'd built an entire war plan disguised as a riddle. And now, his final move was in play. Dawn came slow, smearing pale light across the cemetery until the marble crypts glowed like teeth. From inside the unmarked mausoleum, I could hear sirens echoing faintly through the trees, overlapping in a rising chorus. On the monitors, black-clad agents fanned across the estate grounds. They moved like chess pieces in a game that had already been decided. "FBI, drop your weapon!" a voice barked from one of the feeds. Bernice froze on screen, arms spread, the muzzle of a rifle trained on her chest. Clifford shouted something lost beneath static. For a moment, all I could hear was my heartbeat. Then, order. Handcuffs flashing silver. Headlights pooling on wet grass. The war was ending, just not the way my aunt and uncle had planned. The red phone rang once, startling me. I picked it up. "Ms. Hart," Agent Vance's voice said, calm but clipped. "We have them. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, though my hands still trembled. "Garrison, he's with them. He helped me." "He's alive," she said, "in protective custody. He's been cooperating with us for over a year." I sank into the chair beside the monitors, the weight of adrenaline finally catching up to me. "You knew?" "Your grandfather reached out 3 years ago," Vance said. "He suspected his family's businesses were being used for laundering and trafficking. He didn't have enough evidence on his own, so he worked with us. What you found tonight is the final piece." On one of the screens, the estate's front gates opened, floodlights painting the lawn in sterile white. A convoy of armored trucks rolled through. Agents streamed out like a tide. Vance continued. "The will, the donation, the riddles. He orchestrated all of it to force their hand. Once your aunt and uncle started looking for the evidence, we had reason to move in. You were his contingency plan." "My grandfather used me as bait?" "He used your intelligence," she corrected softly. "He trusted you to finish what he started, and you did." I closed my eyes. For months I'd mourned him as a man betrayed by his own family. Now I understood he had planned the betrayal's exposure down to the last decimal point. He hadn't been destroyed. He'd been deliberate. Every puzzle, every secret, every odd silence over the years, it had all been preparation. "Agent Vance," I said quietly. "He knew they'd kill him, didn't he?" There was a pause. "He suspected," she admitted. "He also knew that sometimes justice needs a martyr." A noise outside snapped me back to the present. A crunch of gravel. Footsteps. My hand flew to the gun holstered under the desk, one of many I'd found stashed in the mausoleum. But it wasn't another enemy. It was an FBI agent at the door, his jacket emblazoned with yellow letters. "Ms. Hart," he called. "You're safe now. Agent Vance sent us." I opened the door. Cold air spilled in, carrying the smell of smoke from the estate. Behind the agent, the sky was lightening into coral and gold. They escorted me to a waiting SUV parked near the cemetery gates. Inside, Agent Patricia Vance sat in the passenger seat, a tablet in her lap. Her face was sharper than I'd imagined. Mid-40s, tired eyes that had seen too many cases like this. Good morning, Aurelia, she said. You look like someone who hasn't slept in a week. I haven't, I said, sinking into the seat. Tell me it's over. She smiled faintly. It's over for them, but it's just starting for you. The SUV rolled forward through the misty cemetery road. As we passed Grandma's grave, I saw movement. Agents unsealing evidence crates, carrying out hard drives, ledgers, and old safes. Your grandfather's network of tunnels connects to multiple properties, Vance explained. We're finding caches everywhere, money, files, surveillance equipment. He documented everything. I stared out the window. The oak trees blurred by. He didn't trust anyone. He trusted you, she said. The words hit harder than I expected. By the time we reached the estate, the scene looked like a military occupation. Black SUVs and armored trucks crowded the lawn. Agents were interviewing staff. Drones hovered overhead. The mansion, once a place of laughter and chess lessons, was now a crime scene. Vance led me to the command tent where a dozen agents worked behind screens glowing with data. Your aunt and uncle are in custody, she said. They'll be charged with money laundering, trafficking, conspiracy, and likely your grandfather's murder once toxicology confirms the cause. God, I whispered. They killed him for money. They killed him because he stopped being useful, Vance corrected. On a monitor, Bernice sat in an interrogation room, still in her funeral pearls, her hands folded neatly. Clifford paced behind her, rage spilling from every gesture. I turned away. What happens now? I asked. Now we execute the rest of the plan. She pulled out a thick folder and handed it to me. This is the real will. He left instructions for you. Read it when you're ready. I didn't open it. Not yet. My body was buzzing with exhaustion and adrenaline, but my mind kept replaying the last words of his letter. Use that brilliant mind of yours to survive. I'd done that, but survival and peace were not the same thing. Vance's phone rang. She listened for a moment, nodded, and said, Understood. Then she turned back to me. The raids are expanding. Clifford's shell companies are being seized as we speak. We're uncovering politicians, judges, even law enforcement officers on the payroll. This goes deeper than we imagined. Then it wasn't just about money, I said. No, she agreed. It was about power, and now that power's collapsing. Outside, dawn broke fully, spilling light through the command tent's thin walls. For the first time, I saw color returning to the estate, the roses catching gold on their edges, the grass sparkling with dew. The house still stood, but the rot underneath it had been exposed. Vance studied me for a moment. He left something else for you. She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was Grandpa's silver raven cane. He asked that we return it once the operation was complete. The sight of it stole my breath. I traced the handle's curve, feeling the etchings under my fingertips. The riddle that started everything. What was lost shall now be found, I murmured. Seems he meant it, Vance said. He wanted you to have closure. I looked out at the field of agents, at the crumbling empire of my bloodline. Closure, I echoed. That's one word for it. She smiled sadly. There's a second funeral scheduled. You should plan it. I nodded. I will. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Agent Vance, why the ravens? Why carve that into the cane? She paused at the tent flap, considering. He told me once that ravens remember faces. They hold grudges, but they also forgive. They always find their way home. When she left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the cane's silver head gleaming in the morning light. Grandpa hadn't just built riddles. He'd built redemption. And now, somehow, it was my turn to solve what came after the ending. The second funeral was quiet, the kind of ceremony where even the wind seemed to hush itself. No cameras, no reporters, no family pretending to mourn a man they'd already betrayed. Just me, Garrison, his temple still faintly bruised, and Agent Vance standing under the oak tree behind the old mansion. We buried what remained of Grandpa's ashes beside Grandma's grave, in a box small enough to fit in my palms. I'd chosen a simple inscription for the plaque, a mind sharp enough to save lives, a heart strong enough to love the unworthy. When the last handful of soil hit the grave, Garrison looked up at me. He'd be proud, he said quietly. He'd be tired, I replied, but maybe that's the same thing. Vance approached, tablet in hand. The operation's complete, she said. Your aunt and uncle were arraigned this morning. The evidence recovered from the tunnels, and your grandfather's archives leaves no doubt. The FBI has dismantled their entire network, more than 70 arrests so far across 3 states. I nodded, but the news didn't feel triumphant. What about the people they hurt? That's where the real work begins, Vance said. The seized assets will fund rehabilitation programs and victim assistance. Your grandfather made sure of it. He had a detailed plan in his private files for how every dollar should be repurposed. I exhaled. He thought of everything. Vance's gaze softened. He thought of you. He trusted you to finish the part he couldn't. Behind her, I could see the mansion. Windows boarded, yellow tape strung across the gates. It was already scheduled for demolition. Soon, even the ghosts would have nowhere to live. Garrison pressed a folder into my hands. You should open this now. Inside was the real will, the one the lawyers had never seen. My fingers hesitated on the seal before breaking it open. The words were simple, written in his neat, deliberate script. To my granddaughter, Aurelia Hart. Half of my legitimate fortune shall go toward creating scholarships for students from low-income families. A quarter will fund organizations dedicated to dismantling trafficking and organized crime. The remaining quarter is yours. Do with it what conscience demands. I trust you more than I ever trusted any judge, politician, or banker. The true inheritance isn't wealth. It's the chance to build something honest from the ashes of what we destroyed. My throat tightened. I handed the letter to Vance. He really left me everything. Everything that wasn't tainted, she said. About $230 million in clean accounts he'd hidden decades ago. He knew your family would never find them. I swallowed. I don't even know what to do with that kind of money. Then start by not doing what they did with it, Garrison said gently. A silence stretched between us, soft, not empty. Are you sure you want to stay here? Vance asked. We can move you somewhere safe. Witness protection is still an option. I shook my head. I'm done running. This is my home, even if I have to rebuild it from ashes. 3 months later, the headlines had faded, replaced by newer scandals. But the investigation's aftershock still rippled through the state. Politicians resigned. Judges stepped down. Every day, a new domino fell. I'd turned part of Grandpa's remaining funds into the Whitfield Foundation, named after Grandma, not the family brand. We launched a scholarship program for first-generation students and a fund for survivors of trafficking. Garrison oversaw the operations, his business acumen finally serving something good. Agent Vance stayed in touch, updating me as the trials approached. Your testimony will be pivotal, she said one evening over the phone. You're not just a witness. You're the bridge between his plan and its result. I'll be there, I promised. At night, I still dreamed of the library, of the chessboard waiting for a move, of the cane resting beside Grandpa's chair. Sometimes in those dreams, he'd look up from a book and say, the hardest puzzles aren't solved with logic, really. They're solved with heart. The trial began in late spring. The courtroom smelled of old wood and fear. Bernice sat at the defense table, pearls still clinging to her neck like parasites. Clifford, red-faced and heavy, refused to look at me. Rows of strangers filled the gallery. Journalists, agents, victims, even former family friends pretending they'd never known us. When the judge called me to testify, the room hushed. I walked past my aunt and uncle without slowing. Their eyes tracked me like hunters too long without prey. On the stand, I told the truth, every piece of it. The coded cane, the riddles, the hidden box, the tunnels. The judge listened, expression unreadable. The prosecutor displayed photographs of the estate's underground archive, the money trails, the chemical compound used to mimic heart attacks. Then they played an audio recording recovered from Grandpa's safe. His voice filled the courtroom, steady and calm. If anything happens to me, know that I loved my family enough to expose them. Justice without sacrifice is just a word. I'm willing to pay the price. By the time the tape ended, no one was breathing. Bernice broke first, slamming her hands against the table. He wanted this, she shouted. He was never innocent. Clifford hissed something under his breath, too low for the microphones, but loud enough for the room to feel the venom. The judge's gavel cracked once. That's enough. When the verdicts came days later, I wasn't surprised. Life sentences for Bernice and Clifford, 25 years for Derek and Melissa, 15 for Aunt Helen, who'd falsified the financial records. The judge looked directly at me as he read the sentencing. In 30 years on the bench, he said, I have never seen such a deliberate betrayal of family trust turned into such a precise act of redemption. Your grandfather built a mechanism for justice. You completed it. For the first time in months, I felt something that resembled peace. Weeks later, I visited the mansion one last time before the demolition crews arrived. The gardens were gone, the roses cut down, the fountain cracked. The aviary stood empty, the wires humming softly in the wind. I carried the silver raven cane and the letter in my coat pocket. Standing beneath the oak, I whispered, "You won, Grandpa. The ravens came home." A dark shape passed overhead, an actual raven, cutting across the sunrise. It landed on the fence, tilted its head, and let out a sound that felt almost like acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then I turned away before the machine started. That evening, I returned to my new house on the outskirts of town, a modest place with tall windows and a small garden. The living room smelled of new paint and possibility. On the wall above the fireplace, I hung the cane in a glass case. Below it sat Grandpa's old chessboard, the pieces arranged in the sacrifice gambit pattern. Every morning, I looked at them before leaving for work. They were reminders that victory never comes without loss. That truth often costs more than we think we can pay. And every night, when the world went quiet, I could almost hear his voice again. Protect the king, even if you must sacrifice the queen. I smiled to myself, because he hadn't been talking about chess. The days after the trial felt strangely hollow. For months, my entire life had been driven by clues, codes, and danger. Now the noise had stopped, replaced by silence that rang in my ears. But silence wasn't peace, it was space, waiting to be filled. I filled it with purpose. By summer, the Whitfield Foundation had opened its first office downtown, a converted warehouse filled with sunlight and the hum of new beginnings. 12 students made up our first scholarship cohort, each of them the kind of person Grandpa would have admired, determined, sharp, unpolished. Some came from foster homes, others from families broken by addiction or poverty. They reminded me of myself before I realized what my last name truly meant. One afternoon, I visited the classroom where the recipients gathered for an orientation session. They sat in a loose circle, notebooks open, eyes bright. A girl named Sienna raised her hand. "Is it true your grandfather built a secret tunnel under his mansion?" The question made me laugh. "It's true. He believed puzzles build discipline. I guess he just took that belief a little farther than most." A boy with dark curls leaned forward. "And you solved it?" "I did," I said softly. "But the puzzle wasn't about treasure. It was about trust, learning who deserves it and who doesn't." They nodded, but I could tell none of them quite understood. Maybe that was good. Maybe they'd never have to. After the session, as the students filed out, the program coordinator, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, approached me. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "These students, this foundation, it's exactly the legacy he wanted." I smiled. "I hope so. He spent his life cleaning up other people's messes. It's nice to finally build something instead." In the evenings, I worked from my new home office, stacks of files on one side, law journals on the other. Garrison had taken on the role of managing the financial arm of the foundation. Every week, he'd send updates, new partnerships, growing impact, lives changed. He'd also started teaching workshops on corporate ethics, a poetic twist for a man once forced to hide inside a corrupt empire. Agent Vance called often too, sometimes for progress reports, sometimes just to check in. "Are you sleeping better?" she asked one night. "Better than before," I said. "Worse than normal people." "That's to be expected," she replied. "People like us, we don't stop hearing echoes. But echoes fade if you fill the silence with something that matters." I glanced at the framed letter on my desk, Grandpa's handwriting crisp against the parchment. "I'm trying," I said. A few months later, the letter arrived, a simple white envelope forwarded from the FBI field office. The handwriting inside was uneven, hesitant. "Dear Ms. Hart, my name is Maria Elena Santos. I am 19 years old and studying to become a nurse. I was one of the girls rescued when your grandfather's operation ended. I wanted to thank you. Because of what you and your grandfather did, I am free. I can see my family again. I have a future now. I keep a photo of your grandfather's cane on my wall, the one I saw in the news. It reminds me that good people sometimes hide behind strange disguises. He must have been brave to leave such a riddle for you, and you must be brave to have followed it. When I graduate, I want to help others like me. Maybe one day I'll work for your foundation. Thank you for giving me my life back. Sincerely, Maria Elena." I sat with the letter for a long time. The words blurred, the weight of what Grandpa had done, of what we had done, finally sank in. His riddles had saved people neither of us had ever met. That night, I placed the letter inside the glass case beside the cane. Two symbols of survival, side by side. The trials stretched over months. Bernice and Clifford received life without parole. My cousins, Derek and Melissa took plea deals that traded testimony for years instead of decades. Aunt Helen's accounting firm was dissolved, her license revoked, her name erased from every company she'd touched. Each verdict felt less like victory and more like release. Every sentence was another rope cut from around my throat. Still, the hardest moment came when the court replayed a phone recording. Clifford's voice ordering the hit that killed Grandpa. The poison that mimicked a heart attack, the payment wired through shell accounts. The courtroom went still. When the judge pronounced them guilty of murder, I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just whispered, "Checkmate." A year later, the foundation had funded hundreds of scholarships and donated millions to anti-trafficking organizations. The FBI used part of Grandpa's model to train new agents in investigating family-based criminal networks. His case became a blueprint for how to dismantle corruption from the inside out. One morning, Agent Vance invited me to speak at a law enforcement conference. I stood on stage beneath bright white lights, facing an audience of prosecutors and officers. My grandfather taught me that puzzles aren't just games, I began. They're practice for real life, because real life rarely hands you all the pieces at once. You have to earn the truth, one clue at a time. When I finished, they stood and applauded. Somewhere in that crowd, I like to imagine Grandpa sitting quietly, smiling, cane resting across his lap. Later that night, when I returned home, I found a small package waiting in my mailbox. Inside was a sealed envelope, no return address. My name written in the same bold hand I knew as well as my own. The letter was dated 2 weeks before his death. My darling Aurelia, if you're reading this, then you've solved the puzzle. Not the one carved into the cane, but the one I hid inside our family's story. You've proven that legacy isn't about what you inherit, but what you protect. I know the world has already tried to pull you into its games of greed and deceit. Don't let it. Use the money I left you to build, not to buy. Use your mind not to win, but to understand. The ravens always return home, and now you have too. Grandpa, I folded the letter and set it beside the chessboard. Outside, the wind shifted. A low, throaty caw echoed through the trees. A raven's cry, distant but unmistakable. I smiled, because even now, long after the riddles were solved and the villains punished, the lesson remained. Trust was the answer. Not the kind that asks for blind loyalty, but the kind that chooses honesty even when it hurts. And maybe, finally, I understood what Grandpa meant all along. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't fortune or property or even justice. It's freedom, the kind you earn when you stop running from who you really are. A year later, the world had returned to color. Not the sharp, artificial brightness of wealth or chaos, but something gentler. Sunlight on water, the green hush of a garden reborn. The Whitfield estate no longer existed. In its place, the Hart Learning Center stood. A glass and stone campus where scholarship students studied engineering, art, and ethics under the branches of a young oak planted in Grandpa's memory. The day it opened, I stood before the crowd of donors, students, and city officials. The breeze carried the scent of roses from the newly planted garden, descendants of the same bushes that had once guarded Grandpa's secrets. People often ask, I said into the microphone, what a man like my grandfather could possibly leave behind that's worth $73 million. I paused, letting the murmurs fade. The truth is, money wasn't his greatest legacy. It was trust. The trust that truth matters, that people can choose to do what's right, even when it costs them everything. When the applause rose, I glanced toward the oak tree. A single raven perched on its highest branch, glossy black against the morning sky. I almost laughed. Later, when the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, I stayed behind. I knelt beside the tree and placed the silver raven cane into a glass case at its base, protected beneath clear stone. The inscription read, "For those who seek truth, even in darkness." I whispered, "You can rest now, Grandpa." That evening, back at my house, I brewed tea and sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo of the two of us in his library, me at 10 years old, grinning over a chessboard, him leaning on his cane, pretending to study the position but really studying me. The chessboard now sat across the room, the pieces frozen in the sacrifice gambit. Every move told a story. The queen surrendered, the king protected, the victory hard-earned. I realized he hadn't been teaching me chess. He'd been teaching me strategy, patience, and how to see the whole board when everyone else was staring at the pieces. That was his gift and his warning. A knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, Agent Vance stood there in plain clothes, looking less like a federal agent and more like an old friend. "I thought you were done showing up at my doorstep," I said, smiling. She shrugged. "Habit. I wanted to see the new place." I ushered her in. "Tea?" "Always." As she looked around, her gaze settled on the framed letter. "He really wrote that before he died?" "2 weeks before," I said. "He must have known time was running out." Vance sipped her tea. He always did think 3 moves ahead. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels companionable rather than empty. Finally, she said, "You know, the Bureau still uses his case in training. We call it the Raven operation. It's the perfect example of how truth hides in plain sight." I smiled faintly. He'd like that. "You should know," she added. "One of the survivors you helped, Maria Elena, is in nursing school now. She just sent us her first year's grades. Straight A's." The news hit me like sunlight. "She's going to change lives," I said softly. "You already did," Vance replied. Months later, I found myself standing behind a podium again, this time at a national law enforcement conference in Washington, D.C. Rows of agents, prosecutors, and students filled the room. The banner behind me read, "Legacy of Integrity, the Whitfield Case Study." I took a breath and began. "My grandfather used to tell me, puzzles are practice for life. You don't get all the answers at once. You get fragments, clues, patterns. And sometimes, to find the truth, you have to destroy the picture everyone else believes in." As I spoke, I saw faces lean forward, the young ones hungry to understand, the older ones haunted by the weight of corruption they'd fought their whole careers. "When he left me that cane," I continued, "I thought he was testing me. But now I understand he was giving me the greatest gift a person can receive, a reason to believe that honesty still matters in a world that rewards deception." When I finished, the applause was long and warm, but it was the silence afterward that mattered more, the kind where people think about what they've heard instead of just clapping for it. That night, back in my hotel room, I found a small envelope slid under the door. No return address. Inside was a card with a single line written in careful, looping script. "The Raven has found its way home." No signature, no explanation, but I didn't need one. I smiled, holding the note to my chest. A year later, I visited the cemetery again. The oak behind Grandpa's grave had grown taller, its leaves catching sunlight like mirrors. The world had moved on. The trials concluded, the corruption purged, the foundation thriving. I brought fresh white roses and set them beside the headstone. "You were right," I said. "The hardest puzzles are the ones that change you." I pulled a small notebook from my coat pocket, the one I used to write down thoughts, ideas, new riddles for the scholarship students. On the first blank page, I wrote, "Where ravens rest and memories keep, truth buried deep will rise again." It wasn't a warning this time, it was a promise. Because puzzles never really end, they just evolve. And as long as people kept seeking, there would always be another truth to uncover, another mystery to solve, another reason to choose integrity over convenience. I looked up at the sky. A raven circled once above the oak and disappeared into the horizon. For the first time since this all began, I felt truly free. The riddle on the cane had never been about a treasure, or a fortune, or even revenge. It had been about me, about becoming the kind of person who could stand alone when everything familiar turned to dust. And now I finally understood the answer. The answer was trust. Trust in what's right. Trust in yourself. Trust that light, no matter how buried, will always find its way back through the dark. The raven had come home. So had I.